Why don't we get started? Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for today's Team Research Forum. We have two of our colleagues from Government Relations. I would like to welcome Philip Harmon, Phil, who's the Director of Research for Federal Government Relations at the Office of the President, and Brandon Minto, who is the Federal Government Relations Director for Government and Community Relations at UC Davis. And we invited them to come back to the forum today. We had a great session with them about a year and some months ago, looking at the research funding landscape and coming developments from Washington that could help our researchers make decisions about their funding strategy. So today they come to us to talk a little bit about what to expect for the next 2 years and what it means for our UC researchers and their research programs. So with that, I'm going to let them get started. As always, please feel free to start posting your questions to the chat box, and then we'll moderate a Q&A at the end of their presentation. Thank you for joining us again.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ana Lucia. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. As Ana said, I'm Brandon Minto, the Director of Federal Government Relations here at UC Davis, and joined by my colleague from the UC system, Phil Harmon. And it's our pleasure to be able to talk to you today about the next 2 years. We just had an election, and we're going to kind of dive into the budget that was just passed and what we are expecting and looking at given the new Congress, the new political dynamic with a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. So without further ado, we'll kind of just jump in here and be respectful of your time. And so we're going to start off by talking about the omnibus appropriations bill that recently passed into law. And so it was a happy holidays indeed, because during the holiday break, President Biden was able to sign an omnibus bill into law. And so we now have a budget for our current fiscal year that started last October and will continue through this September. So it ends on September 30th. And it was a good budget by all measures. We had some significant increases. And so I'm just going to go through some of the key agencies that are of interest to UC Davis and to the University of California and give you some perspective on the budget and kind of what that means looking forward for this next fiscal year. So the budget provided $858 billion in defense funding, which was a $76 billion increase from last fiscal year, and $772.5 billion in non-defense discretionary funding, which was a $42.5 billion increase from last fiscal year. It also importantly provides $58.7 billion for programs authorized by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and $1.8 billion in new funding to implement the CHIPS and Science Act. So I'm going to start with the National Science Foundation, and it's pretty cool that it was able to provide an increase up to $9.87 billion for the NSF. That includes over $1 billion in supplementary funding for NSF-based programming and for CHIPS and Science implementation. And so that $9.87 billion number represents a 12% increase from last year's budget. So NSF definitely got a good, healthy increase, and some highlights within that. So for NSF research and related activities, that is funded at $7.8 billion, which was an increase of $680 million. NSF education and workforce training programs were funded at $1.37 billion, which is an increase of $365 million. And that one, interestingly, according to the Appropriations Committee summary, they described particularly the education and workforce training programs increase as something that will support approximately 2,300 additional research and education grants and 35,000 more scientists, technicians, teachers, and students compared to our last fiscal year. So that's something that we're especially excited about. A couple other priority highlights for NSF include $970 million for climate science and sustainability research through the U.S. Global Change Research Program and clean energy technology. $686 million for artificial intelligence research, including workforce and education partnerships. $235 million for quantum information science research, $187 million for major research equipment and facilities construction, and $76 million for mid-scale research infrastructure. So some definite research wins within the NSF portfolio that we're excited about. Moving on, NIH did also really well in this last budget. It provides $47.5 billion for NIH, which is an increase of $2.5 billion from last year's level. And that also includes an increase of no less than 3.8% for each of the NIH institutes and centers to support a wide range of biomedical and behavioral research. It makes, the budget makes investments in several priority areas, namely 7.3 billion for the National Cancer Institute, 3.7 billion for Alzheimer's disease and related dementia-related research, 75 million for expanded access and activities surrounding ALS. There was an increase of $45 million for research related to opioid stimulants and pain management, with 12.5 million of that to continue firearm injury and mortality prevention research. There was $3.3 billion funded for HIV/AIDS research, 270 million for universal flu vaccine research, 90 million for Down syndrome research, and 76 million for the Office of Research on Women's Health. And within that, there's included 10 million to establish the Office of Autoimmune Disease Research. So some definite wins on the NIH front. It also included funding for ARPA-H, the new Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. That included, the budget included $1.5 billion for ARPA-H, and they're defining their mission as separate from NIH to quote unquote focus on one-time limited projects with quantifiable goals, benchmarks, and accountability to revolutionize how we prevent, treat, or cure a range of diseases, including cancer, infectious diseases, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and others. So we're excited about the opportunities presented with ARPA-H, and I know Phil's going to talk a little bit more about how that agency is being implemented a little further down the line. On the Department of Energy front, the budget provides increase for both the Department of Energy Office of Science and for ARPA-E. The DOE Office of Science receives a 8.36% increase up to 8.1 billion, and ARPA-E receives a 4.4% increase up to 470 million. And within that, in Department of Energy, the agreement also provides not less than 135 million for artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities across the Office of Science programs, and not less than 245 million for the Office of Science's coordinated and focused research program in quantum information science, and which includes not less than 120 million for research and 125 million for the 5 national quantum information science research centers. So you can see some of the direction that Congress is wanting to steer the Department of Energy toward with the new funding paradigm that was passed with the last budget. On the USDA front, the Omnibus Appropriations Bill provides 1.7 billion for the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, which is an increase of 64 million from our last fiscal year. It provides 1 billion for research and education activities, 565 million for extension activities, and 41.5 million for integrated activities. It includes an increase in funding for the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, or AFRI, of 10 million, getting it up from 445 million up to 455 million. And within the budget, there's also what are called exploratory statements or explanatory, statements, and they accompany the actual text of what Congress is funding with kind of more specific direction in terms of what they want the agencies to focus on, where they want that research to go. And within USDA, the explanatory statement encourages the USDA to prioritize funding in AFRI for agroacoustics, organic transitions, career and technical training, opportunities for meat processing, and the Sustainable Agricultural Systems Grant. There's also within USDA, within the budget, 2 million is provided to make competitive grants for agricultural research facilities in support of the Research Facilities Act. We know that's something that's incredibly important to UC Davis. $2 million is really not a lot of money, and it's not going to go very far across higher education. But that explanatory statement further encourages NIFA to prioritize facilities that are located at or primarily benefit minority serving institutions when making awards. And in addition, the agreement urges NIFA to conduct outreach to grant writing technical assistance prior to issuing any funds for awards. And I see a chat question come in as I'm talking here, asking if we are now officially a Hispanic serving institution in HSI. The long story short, we're not quite there. We're just less than a percentage point away from the 25% threshold. But if you look at a couple of our previous years, we were actually over it. And so there's been some changing definitions in terms of what qualifies as an HSI. And previously, for example, DACA students were not counted towards an institution's ethnicity ratio when they're determining the Hispanic serving ratio, the percentage of Hispanic students. That's since changed. And so looking back, we do have some eligibility. So we're trying to get eligibility through having previously been there, even though this current upcoming year, we're just below the 25% threshold. Moving on, so for Ag-ARDA, the Advanced Agricultural Research and Development Authority, they received $1 million within the Office of Secretary for Research, Education, and Economics to further build out their planning and management. And within also the USDA explanatory statement, there's recognition of the need for bio-based and US-grown alternatives to plastic, with direction that the Secretary of Agriculture explore US-based hemp as a robust and dependable plastic alternative. The office is asked to issue a report to the committees within 180 days of the passage of the bill, so in half a year. And finally, the statutory text includes an audit of veterinary livestock disease and vaccination, diagnostic laboratory capabilities, and emergency preparedness. So that is something that Congress is looking at with respect to USDA. Moving on, and I'm going kind of fast here, trying to go through this. We can provide all this in more detail if you want, just let us know, but did want to try and quickly touch upon some of the highlights. On DoD, the final bill allocated $139.76 billion for DoD research, development, test, and evaluation, which does include the basic research 6.1 accounts and more applied accounts. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, also saw an increase of 5.8% for our next fiscal year. Within that, they kind of define, so $4.5 billion for the development of fielding of hypersonic weapons and related technology. So that's going to be a big area of emphasis within DoD, as well as on the research side, $1.1 billion for microelectronics, which supports the allocation of funds provided in the CHIPS Act. And so, as you can see, this last budget was pretty good across the board for the federal government. There were a lot of increases in the research accounts that we definitely track and are passionate about. And then I will also add, so earmarks have been back the last 2 years, and we did really well the last fiscal year on the earmark front. And so we got $1.5 million from Congresswoman Matsui for behavioral health services and crisis care center at UC Davis Health. And then $1.2 million from Congressman Thompson for advanced analytical smoke taint equipment that will be located at campus. And we just opened up our earmark solicitation page for this next upcoming fiscal year for FY24. We are expecting earmarks to come back this next year. The Republican caucus actually took a vote on whether or not to continue with earmarks, and pretty overwhelmingly, the caucus voted in support of continuing them. And so if you haven't already seen that solicitation, keep an eye out for it. We're hosting it through the UC Davis InfoReady internal grant solicitation webpage, and encourage you to take a look at that, because there really can be some opportunities for some one-time kind of, I look at it as like a catalyst type funding to help get a program up and running. So definitely something to keep your eye on as we move forward, because we are expecting earmarks to continue. You want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Phil?
Yeah, just let me add one additional point with regard to the budget and the funding levels that Brandon just summarized. As Brandon mentioned, it was a good bill, and as you can see from the data and from what Brandon has summarized, pretty much everybody is up and significantly. And so I think the last time we talked to you was in March of last year when the omnibus passed at that point in time. And I would say that our message to you is the same as it was back in March, which is, as you well know, we've been functioning under a continuing resolution for several months, which means that the agencies are unable to begin new initiatives. And they tend to tap the brakes significantly on putting out solicitations for work, tapping the brakes for any additional funding for supplementals. Now that they are functioning under FY23, now that they have their bank accounts full for their money for the next fiscal year, this is a great opportunity to have those conversations with your program manager, depending on where you're funded, and talk about where not only what ideas, what opportunities might be coming out of their division, directorate, agency, but also opportunities to supplement your existing grants. I think even though they have their FY23, even though this is earlier than last year when it was March, they are still now 9 months left before the end of the fiscal year, which means they need to obligate that money sooner rather than later. That means they're going to start pumping out those solicitations sooner rather than later. That means they want to make sure that their funding is obligated. And a great way for them to make sure that their funding is obligated is via the supplemental for existing grants. And so if you have those opportunities, have that conversation with your program manager. It's a great opportunity. And we're happy to talk more about that. So just a little plug on that front. And one additional plug, sorry, mentioning NSF and the 12% increase and what's coming out, soon coming down the pike. I'm well aware, probably one of the biggest funding opportunities coming out of the National Science Foundation, the new TIP Directorate, the Technology Innovation and Partnership Directorate, are those regional innovation engines. And I know that UC Davis is part of 2 proposals, this type 1 proposal that funds up to $1 million and the type 2 proposal that funds up to $160 million. If you are part of that type 1 proposal, you should be hearing relatively soon from the National Science Foundation whether or not you've made that award. But I'm a glass half full. I feel optimistic you'll win. And with that, to the next slide, Brandon.
All right. So looking forward with the new Congress. So we just had our election in November. We've got a new House of Representatives with the Republicans in control. The Democrats retain control in the Senate. The big takeaway, though, is really just how razor thin the margins are for either party. And I think we really saw this play out with the speaker election. And it took 15 tries for Speaker McCarthy to get elected. And it shows you just how little the margin for error is. And with the elections being so close, with the majorities being so tight, the net effect or impact of that is that each party is going to almost be more sensitive to kind of the far left or the right wing of the party. And so like with McCarthy, the far right had a heavy hand in the outcome of the election. And you saw as they withheld those votes that it took 15 bites at the apple in order for him to secure that election. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of wiggle room or a whole lot of margins moving forward. And in order to get the votes on the Republican caucus, like Speaker McCarthy will have to make concessions for kind of the far right side of his party and similarly on the Democratic side. And so it's going to be challenging to pass any comprehensive legislation with this paradigm. And it's going to be pretty tough. It's going to be a fun ride this next year. On the committee leadership side, on the House Science Committee, the new chair is Representative Frank Lucas. He's a Republican from Oklahoma. So kind of the analysis on him, the MO is he's considered more moderate than many of his Republican colleagues. He was the former chair of the Agricultural Committee. He said to accept the science of climate change, but whether or not he actually is going to support various policies or actions on that front is unclear. Zoe Lofgren, she is the ranking member, so Democrat from California. So the top Democrat on the committee, that's definitely helpful for UC and for California. Her new district actually has more agricultural land in it. And so we're hearing that we should see some more ag research focus on the House Science Committee in this next Congress. Given Chairman Frank Lucas's previous role on the House Ag Committee as the chair or the ranking member, and with Zoe Lofgren's new district, it's kind of something that they're focusing on. And so we're hearing that they might come up with language focusing on ag research to be included potentially in the Farm Bill. And so those are some things that we're going to be watching with the House Science Committee, and some other priorities that we know are going to be forthcoming from the committee and conversations that we've had with those offices include quantum reauthorization, so quantum research, air mobility and drones, emerging technologies, leveraging how computers can tackle world challenges, the NASA reauthorization, hydrogen research and development, weather forecasting, soil sequestration, wildfire research. And then there is going to be some oversight priorities for the Science Committee and the new Congress with the areas of like research security, open access, the CHIPS implementation, and the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Innovation and Jobs Act. On the Senate side, for the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, we have Maria Cantwell from Washington is the chair. And then Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, is taking over as the ranking member. So he's going to be the top Republican on the Senate side. And then on the House Appropriations Committee, we have Kate Granger, Republican from Texas, assuming the role as the chair, and Rosa DeLauro, who was the former chairperson, is going to be the ranking member. We are hopeful, the University of California is, that on the national security side of things with appropriation, that UC's interests should hopefully be okay, as Ken Calvert, he's a Republican from Central California. He is the chair of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, so there is a little bit of an opportunity for California there with that connection. On the Senate side, for appropriations, Patrick Leahy from Vermont is the chair, the top Democrat, and then Richard Shelby from Alabama is the top Republican, the vice chair. Senator Feinstein from California continues to serve on appropriations, and so that is a good thing for California as well.
Thank you, Brandon. And got it. You might have heard about this, but the House has set up a special select committee on China. This was an agreement that Speaker McCarthy made with some of his more hardline members. The new chair is going to be Congressman Gallagher of Wisconsin. He's a bit of a China hawk, no surprise. What will this committee be doing besides obviously the obvious of analyzing and reviewing any relationships with China? From our perspective, and I think everybody here is well aware, universities have been under scrutiny by Congress, both sides of the aisle, by previous administration and current administration. So we fully expect to be under the microscope of this new committee. We fully expect to research security will be one of the topics. We fully expect topics like former Confucius Institutes, talking about any economic ties to China. And universities, for what it's worth, universities will not be the only focus of this committee. Industry will be focused. You've probably heard about the scrutiny for TikTok and others. So this is going to be a fairly broad scope for this select committee. I think what we're trying to do is make sure we keep a close eye on who's going to be appointed to the committee. Hopefully we'll have some strong allies and keep the committee balanced. But we're certainly also waiting to see who the staff will be and to have those conversations with the staff, because again, as everybody here knows, universities have been under the microscope with regard to our relationships with China, our foreign nationals who are incredibly important for international collaboration falling under that microscope. And so we will play defense. We will be able to talk about what is important, what is taking place on the university in the academic community, and talking about the security protocols that we have in place, and talking about the importance of disclosing. But we do believe that we are in a position to play offense too, because we have a good story to tell, because it is important for us to hammer the importance of international collaboration, to hammer that you can increase security protocols while maintaining the principles of academic freedom. There can be a balance. But we are also going to be playing offense when it comes to, if the focus of this committee is our competition with China and how we better prepare for China's strength. One of those areas is making the right investments in research and development. And so with the passage of CHIPS, there was a significant amount included in appropriations to bring microelectronics manufacturing back to the United States. But it also authorized, which is not real money, authorized significant money for the science agencies, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, NIST, and we've seen some of those investments made in the FY23 appropriations, but it fell far short of what was authorized. And so what we're going to be making a case, not only to the Select Committee on China, but obviously with the appropriators, is if you want the United States to be competitive with our international competitors, including China, then you need to make those investments in science and technology. You need to make sure that you are providing the robust funding necessary to the National Science Foundation, DOE, DOD, NASA, NOAA, USDA. Those investments need to be made. So we're going to be doing our best to play offense, talk about the importance of those investments. And back to you, Brendan.
Yeah, no, really important stuff. Thank you, Phil. And then another new change that we're kind of expecting that may impact you if you're thinking about going to DC, or if you're wanting to engage with Congress, is it's fully open now for in-person meetings. And so under the last 2 years, The public entrances were not all open, and anybody who wanted to go into the Capitol actually had to have a scheduled appointment, and then the office that you were scheduled to meet with would have to come down and escort you up to that office and then back out of the building. And you couldn't stay in the building in between meetings. And so it definitely made it much more difficult to go up to Capitol Hill and do in-person meetings if you're trying to hit a bunch of offices while you're back in DC, which, you know, coming from California, that's what we typically try to do to make the most out of that trip. And so now that's all gone away. All the public entrances are open. You do not any longer require an escort. And so, you know, we're still trying to figure out exactly what that means for each office. And I think it is going to be a little bit dependent upon the individual office. Some are probably going to be more reticent to continue with as many Zoom meetings and want to share more things in person. Some offices really like the Zoom paradigm are going to continue on that front. And so, you know, we try to position ourselves to be able to meet respective staff, respective offices, you know, where they are, where they want to meet to kind of, you know, hopefully advance the agenda better. And so we're going to just stay light on our feet and kind of adapt to each office and what their preferences are. But we are expecting a stronger likelihood that there's going to be more desire for in-person meetings over the next 2 years. And we're expecting some challenges too. And the first one is starting to play out right now, and that's the debt ceiling. And so yesterday, actually, we technically hit our borrowing cap. And so the Department of Treasury is now employing extraordinary measures to continue to pay the bills. And so the Treasury Secretary has said that we can definitely pay things through June 5th. So we've got a little bit of time yet, but something's going to need to be done. And it is possible that Republicans may seek a return to a sequester-like mechanism, and that's back from 2011, the Budget Control Act under President Obama, where there was just across the board really painful cuts that nobody liked, and that were kind of not done with a scalpel, but rather with a sledgehammer, where it was just not very targeted, not very thoughtful. It's just a kind of across the board, very, very difficult cuts. And we are seeing this debate play out, and Speaker McCarthy has been reaching out to the Democrats to try and start the conversation on this front. Right now, the Democrats are basically saying we're not willing to negotiate on the debt limit. It has to be increased. And I think that politically, part of what they're doing is they're waiting to see if the Republicans can unify around a single message with respect to the debt limit. And, you know, there's a lot of differing views within the Republican caucus. And, you know, as we saw with Speaker McCarthy's election, there's not a whole lot of margin there. And so they're trying to get on the same sheet of music in terms of what they want to see with respect to the debt limit. And until they do, I don't know that the Democrats are really going to be willing to engage. And so it's a little bit of a game of a chicken, who's going to blink first. And the Republicans are definitely, you know, expected to want some sort of concession for agreeing to raise the debt limit, some sort of spending control type of thing. And so in modern history, we've never seen the United States default on our debt. We've never reached the point to where Treasury can no longer pay the bills. So we are charting a little bit of unknown territory at this point in time. People have said that, you know, us not meeting the debt limit and defaulting could be catastrophic for the markets and for the economy. Some say maybe not so much, but it's going to be somewhere between a major catastrophic thing and a little blip. And we don't really know where it would land, but it's going to be a big, big, big issue in Congress as we move closer to June 5th. And we're going to have to just continue to stay really engaged on that front as we navigate these waters. I would say for all of you, if you can start thinking about in your particular, you know, orbit and your research, what a government shutdown would potentially mean to you, you know, what a loss of funding could mean, and because we are going to start cultivating some of those talking points as we navigate the debt limit and the FY22 appropriations with the upcoming budget for next year. And I think, Phil, were you going to talk about the budget?
Yeah, so as Brandon talked about the big fight coming up with the debt ceiling, the appropriations shouldn't be tied to the debt ceiling, but it's going to be. And so, you know, part of the, as Brandon summarized, some of the discussions, you know, the fiscal hawks are talking about trying to reduce spending as part of an agreement to raise the debt ceiling. And There have been discussions about reduce or cutting or addressing, reforming the mandatory programs. That's where Social Security and the Medicare, Medicaid, the entitlement programs reside. But there are a number of members who say that can't be touched. That's a third rail. So what are they looking at? They're looking at discretionary funding. What are appropriations? That's discretionary funding. And from what we've heard, one of the agreements that Speaker McCarthy made to secure those votes to become Speaker was a promise or a commitment to mark up the FY24 bills that they'll be doing this year. Remember, we're currently functioning under FY23, but there's a promise to mark up the FY24 bills to help address the debt ceiling issue, but also to address the fiscal conservatives' priorities is to mark up the bills at FY22 levels. What does that mean? That means, obviously, on the face, a significant cut. But let's figure out the numbers. If you were to cut the discretionary budget from FY24 to FY22, they are going to have to cut $130 billion. Now, the defense hawks have already voiced their opposition to any cuts to the Department of Defense. So that means if you were to put all of the cuts over to non-defense discretionary, and that's where a majority of what the funding that comes to the university, not only the science agencies, but also the Department of Education. If you were to put all the cuts to make FY22 levels, that is a 20 to 25% cut from where we are right now. Those are not acceptable. And I don't believe that even the Republican House, even the fiscal conservatives would be able to bite that bullet. And so, you know, the question is, and to add another flavor to this, is that the defense hawks are not going to be content with just a flat budget for the Department of Defense and putting all the cuts in non-defense. They're going to want an increase. And considering the number of international issues that we're dealing with, including Ukraine, it's a pretty good guess that defense is actually going to get an increase. And so then you're going to put in an even bigger cut to non-defense discretionary. Any realistic forecast understands that's just not going to happen. It won't even be able to pass the House. And so I think what we're going to have is a situation where the House marks up some of the bills and then frankly just can't get the others across the finish line, just because I just don't think that there are enough votes there to have those draconian cuts to the non-defense discretionary programs. So what does that mean? I think it means exactly what we've been going through for the past several years. It means that we're going to have a continuing resolution. And just a little stat, and you might remember this stat from last year, if you participated in the presentation we gave, because the record is still not broken, is the last time all 12 appropriations bills were signed into law on time. Remember, they're supposed to be on time on September 30th. Last time Congress did that was 1997. So we've become inured to these continuing resolutions. We've become used to dealing with these continuing resolutions. Agencies have, we have. And so there's no doubt that we're going to have a continuing resolution at the end of this year, hopefully not a government shutdown, but there's no doubt that the appropriations process is going to be tied to the debt ceiling negotiations. Hopefully we get some sort of resolution there and frees up the appropriations, not with draconian cuts, but I think it's going to be a long game. Now, I've one small moment here. I've painted a fairly dire picture of the FY24 appropriations. I do, and Brandon and I remain glass half full people, and I do believe that we will get an appropriations bill across the finish line. I do believe that there will be increases because it is incumbent upon Brandon, me, and our colleagues in the academic community to make the case for the important investments that are necessary for research and development, for the Department of Education and the other programs. And so we're going to be making that case over the next several months. Is it going to be a rocky road? You bet, but we'll get there. And back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Phil. No, and I appreciate that optimistic tone because we are definitely, painting a little bit of a dire picture. But I think that, part of it is just understanding the potential roadblocks and landmines, right? And figuring out how we can best tactfully navigate those. And so that's where we're at. That's what we're thinking about. And we're, understanding kind of the political landscape. Okay, how can we best navigate within this and make sure that we're doing the best job possible to advocate for the important UC priorities and seeing them across the finish line. A little extra color too to Phil's comments. Trump was just on record saying that absolutely no Republican should cut Medicare or Social Security. And so certainly that will have an impact on how some Republicans are viewing these discussions. And I think that, to Phil's earlier point, it just puts that much pressure on the non-defense discretionary side of the funding house in terms of how this process is going to play out. So we really are going to have to make sure that we're engaging across the board with Congress, really talking about the value of these investments, why they matter, the return on the investment, and ensuring that they can continue. Moving forward, we are expecting also some challenges in the forms of oversight and inquiries. And so we know that with the Republican House, they've been talking a lot about different oversight and inquiries that they want to engage in and look at. And so some of those are going to be gain of function research and kind of, what is the definition of that? Has that been happening through the various, funding agencies, origins of COVID? That's still a big talking point within the Republican caucus. And then, by extension, partnerships in China, the role of China in research in COVID. And so Phil touched upon the special committee on China. So these are all things that we're expecting are going to be coming up that will, certainly touch upon higher education. They may be inquiring into certain research. They may be inquiring into certain activities. And so, we're going to be responsive, work with Congress, and do our best to navigate some of these admissions as well. You may have seen, but there's been some discussion nationally around some various admission policies, affirmative action, looking at various states. Actually, this one I think is an opportunity for UC and for California to lead. We have been operating under a paradigm in California where affirmative action hasn't been allowed for some time, and we've still been able to do really well at UC with our admissions. And so this is an opportunity for UC to kind of be able to lead across the higher education landscape and share our story in terms of what we've been doing well, and hopefully help some other entities be able to navigate that. And I would just also add that we work closely with all of our colleagues across higher education through APLU, through AAU, and we really try to collectively speak with one voice as a higher education community, and we work to make sure that we're asking for the same numbers for NIH and NSF and the various funding agencies. And so we do pay attention to kind of how things are intersecting with higher education, the federal government, and not just specifically to California, but across the board, because higher education really does have a better voice when we're able to speak collectively together.
Recognizing we got about 5 minutes, or want to make sure that there's ample time for Q&A. And Brandon and I are going to probably plow through this last list for the next 5 minutes. But again, want to make sure we cover it, but want to make sure that there's ample time for Q&A. But just to set the stage, as you can see, this is a long list. This is just the greatest hits that are on our radar screen that we expect to be working on over this time. But just to quickly summarize, I'll summarize some areas and then I'm going to hand it off to Brandon. But obviously the CHIPS and Science Act implementation, how is NSF and DOE implementing them? Are they implementing the programs that have been authorized? Research security, we touched on this. This is going to continue to be a hot topic. It's going to be about our relationship with China through these committees. It's going to be about, whether or not we are disclosing the information that we should be to the agencies. NSDD 189, if you're not familiar with this provides us an exemption for fundamental research to allow us to publish. This is under scrutiny. Not a surprise because it's tied to the first one. It's going to continue to be an issue. We understand the National Academies actually has a committee looking at this. F&A rates. This is very quickly going to tie this to the ARPA-H reauthorization. If you've been around for a while, Congress gets worked up over the F&A rates because they feel like our rates are too high. We explain it to them. We usually make the case, then they understand. But you're dealing with new staff and have to explain why indirect cost rates are expensive. But we expect to see scrutiny for our F&A rates. Fetal tissue research, again, one of the greatest hits, will continue to be an issue. Unionization, I think we've just gone through that. I think that we're going to be working with the agencies and Congress on this issue. More to come on that one. Open access, you saw the announcement that came out of the OSTP. I think we're keeping a close eye on the agencies and how they implement it and make sure there's uniformity. We are working closely with those agencies and OSTP to make sure it's fair and balanced. BIDOL and determination of exceptional circumstances. We anticipate that the agencies might put a little more restriction around the Bayh-Dole flexibility, but we're going to be fighting against that. We've seen it in the past. We're going to do it again. Section 117 reporting, again, falls under scrutiny. Right now, we report up to 250,000 for any international contracts and grants. We expect that to be lowered in subsequent legislation. Back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Phil. And so moving along, some reauthorizations are going to be coming up this next year, like Farm Bill and NASA NIH. These are important. In the case of the Farm Bill, it's a 4-year authorization, and it basically sets the spending levels that are allowed. And so just quick aside, right, you have authorizations and appropriations. Authorization gives the authority to be able to fund the money for a particular thing, and then the appropriations is the actual funding of the money. And so the authorizations are going to be important, these reauthorizations, because they are going to set the allowable levels that will be able to be appropriated. And so we're definitely looking at those, want to see the highest levels possible. But part of it is a little bit of a dance in terms of, what's the appropriate thing to ask for. So like, for example, within the Farm Bill, AFRI has actually been authorized at $800 million the last few years, but it's never been appropriated for more than $455 million. So as a higher education community, we're working with our colleagues to figure out, okay, should we ask for more authorization for AFRI? Should we leave it at 800, considering that it's only ever been funded at 455 million? And so we're trying to have those conversations and reach consensus across the higher education community. But the goal is definitely to get the highest possible authorizations included in these pieces of legislation so that we can fight for greater appropriations down the line. Moving along, alternative proteins and cultivated meats, we're expecting to continue to be an important issue. Congressman Bera has been out front leading on this issue. We've been doing a lot at UC Davis, and we're going to continue to watch that, follow it. Double the Pell continues to be a top issue across UC and in the higher education community. We have it up to $7,395 now for the 23-24 academic year, but the goal is to get it up to $13,000. And then once we have it doubled up to $13,000, we'd like to see it indexed to inflation. So we're continuing on that front. DACA continues to be an incredibly important issue for UC and across higher education. There's a few court cases pending, and we're continuing to engage with the administration and monitor that. Animal model research is something that's important at UC Davis. We have one of 7 national primate centers. And there's some scrutiny and some attacks on animal model research. And this is kind of a bipartisan thing. In fact, Senator Booker and Congresswoman Roble Allard are some of the biggest people who are against animal research. And we're continuing to try and engage on that front, really talk about the importance of having the animal model as a tool in the tool belt. Obviously, maybe not appropriate for everything, but there's certain instances where it just can't be duplicated. And, UC Davis has been a leader on that front in terms of animal research. Student debt continues to be an important issue. We're monitoring what the administration is going to do with debt relief. They've kind of postponed it a few times. There's been some starts and stops, some legal challenges, but it's definitely an issue that we're going to continue to monitor.
With that, we're happy to answer your questions.
Always fabulous to hear you speak and just learn so much about what's going on in Washington that affects our day-to-day research at UC Davis. There's a few questions already. There's several questions around ARPA-H. I think there's a lot of interest in any information around the plans for that agency, long-term viability for funding. So any additional commentary around ARPA-H?
Can we take a crack at that, Brandon?
Sure.
Yeah, so as you're well aware, and we touched on, so in FY22, ARPA-H got $1 billion, and as Brandon mentioned, in FY23 got $1.5 billion. How much have they spent of that? Zero. And so, with the exception of staffing up. So a couple quick items on that. We have yet to see any solicitations. I'm not quite sure when we'll be seeing some solicitations. We actually had a meeting. The VCRs of the 10 UC campuses had a meeting with along with a number of researchers, had a meeting with the new director of ARPA-H in December. And right now she's just trying to hire. And so frankly, a couple messages from her to our campuses was, if you have researchers that are interested in serving as program managers, to please send their names to her or to ARPA-H, because they're they're interested in hiring. And of course, their initial reaction is, well, I'm not really keen on moving to Washington, D.C. These will be remote locations. You work from home, but although there will be expected travel. But we do anticipate some solicitations coming out in the near future, but I think right now they're just trying to focus on hiring. I think they've got like a staff of 10 right now. But we are keeping a very close eye on when those solicitations will come out and what those solicitations could look like. And we certainly provided them a number of ideas for what that research looks like.
Then I see Angela kind of follow-up question. Do we see the program as having a long-term future in our opinion? I think so. I think that health is one of those issues that seems to be pretty bipartisan and everybody's impacted by. And so there seems to be some ongoing political desire to see it ramped up, to see some innovations come out of there. And so I think that it does have a future, not something that's just going to go away soon. Phil, did you want to add to that at all?
No, you're right on target. It has bipartisan support. Everybody's pretty jazzed about it. Everybody's very jazzed about the concept of a DARPA-like model for ARPA-8 or for the HHS side, because I think, and I don't know if people have had this frustration, is the challenges with the NIH process and winning grants. It's very competitive. The win rate is fairly low. If you're going to follow the ARPA-H model, or follow the DARPA model for ARPA-H, there can be very good opportunities for you, and probably a higher win rate, frankly. But I would say this very quickly: when it comes to ARPA-H, if they're going to follow the DARPA model, it's going to be about relationships. It's not going to be like working with NIH or NSF that's pure peer review. It's going to be about your relationship with the program manager. And when you have those relationships with the program manager, you're in, and you've got that relationship. You're going to be well funded. So I strongly encourage, once these program managers start getting in place, to build those relationships, to kick around your ideas, because it puts you in a better position to be funded.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions also regarding the NSPM 33, which is the National Security Presidential Memorandum that was issued under the Trump administration, and what that means for research security, and if Congress might be considering funding activities around research security.
So I will say this, so we are waiting for the final guidelines to come out of NSPM 33. The onus right now is on the agencies to make sure that they come up with the guidelines, even though I think what is out there from NIH and NSF will be replicated across all the agencies. And what we have pressed very hard, and what was included in the NSPM 33, is uniformity. And so, we don't want to have to report different issues, different disclosure requirements, different conflict of interest issues, different bio sketches per agency. The idea is to have uniformity across all the agencies. As far as funding goes, we've actually made that case that, this is an additional administrative cost to the university. I'm not quite sure we'll get there. I think right now it seems like the agencies are like, well, if we provide the additional cost to you to help cover this, then that's taking away from grants. So I think right now the onus is going to be on us to be able to cover these costs, but we have made the case, and I will say at least that there's been sort of chin scratching, as the best way to describe it, not like a no, but a certain amount of chin scratching, like a from Congress, so which I take as a positive.
We have a question from Lori Lubin, who's the Associate Dean for Research from the College of Letters and Sciences, regarding justification for additional requests for funds based on increase in graduate student and postdoc salaries, and what your recommendations might be or your thoughts are around that.
Looking into that very question, I don't know. I do not know. I know that doesn't help you, but I'm looking into. I don't know yet, but we're looking into it.
We will follow up with you. That is a good question.
So while we wait for more questions, during the session, one theme that was brought up repeatedly was inviting faculty to make connections with program officers or representatives. And I just want to hear a little bit more about, for faculty who don't know where to start, are there any resources, or how can your offices assist them in making those connections to start those relationships?
Brandon, you want me to take the first step?
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
So I would say, if I understand the question right, it's like, well, if I have an idea for this widget, but I'm not quite exactly sure which program to talk to, which program manager to talk to in the agency. I mean, obviously, I would encourage you to reach out to Brandon and to Anna to talk about what you want to do. But then if you're trying to figure out exactly the program manager, it's actually not that challenging. You know, if using NSF as an example, because it's an easy example, if it's an engineering related issue, you kind of just Google up and looking through the engineering directorate, and in many cases, for all these agencies, once you identify the program manager, you can send them a cold email and saying, look, I have some ideas, wondering if I can talk to you. They'll all take Zoom. You don't have to fly into DC to do these meetings. Talk about your idea. They may say, look at this solicitation that is out right now, may be applicable. Or they may say, well, give me a white paper on what you're thinking about doing. So these, you know, the whole idea about interacting with these agencies, don't be intimidated. Don't feel like you need to hop on a plane and come into DC and knock on doors just to make these connections. These program managers, this is what they're supposed to do. This is what they're supposed to have, these relationships and be helpful to you. So, you know, this is, if it's a matter of just trying to find the right person, Brandon can help you, I can help you, Lana can help you. I know, but you know, not a problem. Don't let it be an impediment.
I think Phil said it perfectly, right? It's all about the relationships. And so, you know, identifying that appropriate person, reaching out to them, engaging, having a conversation, being able to clearly state, you know, this is what my expertise is, this is where I want to go, and just finding that alignment really can move mountains. And so it's certainly something that we're happy to help with. I see Nathan said in the chat that frequently visits Congress when goes to DC and just contacts the UC lobbyists, and we help set up meetings. So that would be, you know, me or Phil. And so, yeah, we're happy to help. You know, just let us know, and we'll figure out the pathway, even if we don't know it right off the top of our heads. We'll find the route.
Yeah, Meg nailed it too in her comment.
Any more questions from our audience? Or comments?
I know we threw a lot at you, but, you know, I think the big takeaways are just a good win for the current budget, and, you know, some challenges ahead of us that we're, you know, aware of and navigating, and, you know, optimistic that we'll be able to succeed. So it's going to be an interesting ride, though. We got some big things coming up. It's going to start with the debt limit debate, and we'll see how that plays out, and then right on into the budget. And just, you know, keep the faith, though. Hopefully it'll all work out.
If there are no more questions, I just want to thank again our speakers. It's always delightful to host them. It gives for a bit of a different flavor of our Team Research Forum. So thank you so much for joining us again. People are asking about the presentation. This presentation has a lot of information that we consider competitive intelligence for our faculty. So we're going to put it somewhere where it's not available to the public, but will be available to our UC Davis stakeholders. So send me a message if you're interested in accessing some of this information, and I'll be happy to help you with that. And with that, I want to wish everyone a great weekend, and we'll see you in a few weeks for the next Team Research Forum. Thank you again to Brandon and Phil.
Thank you.
Thanks all.